The High Middle Ages was a time period that spanned
For payment. For the Crusaders, starving and betrayed, there was no choice left. They had gambled everything on Constantinople, and now only conquest could save them. The holy vow to Jerusalem was dead. What remained was war for survival, war for loot, war for vengeance. The Crusaders sharpened their swords and built their towers. Constantinople itself was now their Jerusalem. Turkiye, Part 9, The Sack of Constantinople. On the 12th of April, 1204, the wind turned in favor of the Venetians. Their fleet surged against the sea walls, and the Crusaders stormed the battlements. The Byzantine defense crumbled. The Varangian Guard fought to the death, but it was not enough. What followed was 3 days of horror. Constantinople, the greatest city in Christendom, was plundered without mercy. Palaces, churches, and monasteries were stripped bare. Hagia Sophia itself was defiled, its altar broken, its mosaics smashed. Priceless relics, icons, and treasures were carried west to Venice and beyond. Statues that had stood since the time of Rome were melted for coin. The slaughter was indiscriminate. Men, women, and children were put to the sword. Nuns were raped on the steps of churches. Drunken soldiers paraded in stolen vestments. The Queen of Cities was reduced to a gutted carcass, her glory trampled in the mud. Priurum. Part 10. The Latin Empire. When the orgy of violence ended, Constantinople was no longer Byzantine. The empire of 1,000 years was carved into pieces. Baldwin of Flanders was crowned emperor of a new Latin empire. Boniface of Montferrat seized Thessalonica. Venice took ports, islands, and treasures beyond counting. But the Byzantines did not disappear. Refugees fled to Nicaea, Epirus, and Trebizond, where they built successor states, vowing to one day reclaim their capital. Yet Constantinople itself lay in ruins. Streets once filled with scholars and merchants were empty. The greatest library in Christendom was gone. Centuries of wealth and culture had vanished in a single week. The Latin Empire would survive barely 60 years, but the wound inflicted on Byzantium was permanent. Even when the city was retaken in 1261, it was a shadow of its former self. Tunihuri. Part 11. Legacy of Ruin. The Fourth Crusade deepened the rift between East and West beyond repair. The Orthodox and Catholic worlds would never again be reconciled. Byzantium, crippled by the sack, never regained its former strength. It lingered on, weakened and fractured, until the rising power of the Ottoman Turks finally claimed Constantinople in 1453. What had begun as a holy mission to Jerusalem ended as one of the greatest betrayals in history. The Crusaders had sworn to free the Holy Sepulchre, but instead they defiled Hagia Sophia. They had vowed to strike at the Muslim world, but instead they shattered the greatest Christian city. The Fourth Crusade was not a march of faith. It was the death warrant of Byzantium, and in its flames, the dream of a united Christendom was consumed forever. The road to Jerusalem had been lost the moment the Crusaders sailed into the Golden Horn. The Fourth Crusade was no march of faith. It was the death warrant of Byzantium.
In 1204, Constantinople, which had stood up to countless Eastern invaders and served as Europe's shield in the East, was betrayed and sacked by misguided crusaders. The Crusaders would hold Constantinople for about 60 years before the Greeks finally took their kingdom back. Nevertheless, the death blow had been dealt to the Byzantine Empire, though it would take the massive Byzantine bureaucracy another 2 centuries to realize it. As if the Byzantine betrayal were not bad enough, the next crusade, or Children's Crusade, was a truly shameful affair. Thousands of young people from across Europe tried to make their way to the Holy Land, thinking that their youthful innocence would succeed where their elders had failed. Many died trying to cross the Alps.
They were only children, yet they carried a dream bigger than kingdoms. Through rain and hunger they walked, not for glory, but for faith. Each step was a prayer.
They were only children, chasing a dream across the sky's teeth. Snow took them one by one, yet still they climbed, eyes fixed on a world they had never seen, somewhere beyond.
But most never made it further than Marseille, where they were sold as slaves.
Keep 'em moving! Eyes front! silver's good. Look at the shoulders on this one.
Strong enough for the oars, he is.
You row well, Crusader, and you might yet see another sunrise.
Realizing that this abuse of crusading was beginning to make Christianity look really bad, Innocent III called the Fourth Lateran Council and redirected the Crusaders toward Egypt, which he considered to be the heart of Muslim resistance. Though the Crusaders were able to take a town or two, they were forced to surrender their gains after a devastating defeat at the hands of Sultan Al-Kamil, who had succeeded Saladin as Sultan of Egypt.
At dawn, the armies met upon the sand, the Crusaders certain of victory until the crescent banners moved. Sultan Al-Kamil led the charge himself, a storm of steel and emerald.
The word has been applied to different groups, but our main concern is its meaning in Christianity. Among Christians, heresy meant a disagreement with the current Christian doctrine. A person who consistently held this disagreeable opinion was called a heretic. Before the High Middle Ages, between the 11th and 13th centuries, heresy had mostly occurred infrequently, but beginning in the 11th century there were a lot more urban cities. The cities did not hold the same religious values as the rural areas, and heresy became a common accusation. During this time, the popularity of Christianity spread. It reached areas like Scandinavia, Poland, Bohemia, Hungary, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Russia. Groups like the Danes and the Vikings were also moving to areas that were already predominantly Christian, like Normandy and England. These groups began to adopt Christian ideals and practice Christian rituals. As Christianity's popularity grew throughout the world, the power of the Catholic Church increased. At this time, Christian churches were Catholic. Protestant churches, like Lutherans, Presbyterians, and Baptists, didn't exist until after the Reformation in the 16th century. All of these churches across Europe reported to the same governing power, the Pope. Because the Pope was so powerful, clergy held a strong influence in the secular world with nobles and royalty. In the 11th century, the Pope called for a crusade. A crusade is a holy war. This particular holy war was in the interest of gaining control of the Holy Land in the Near East. When crusaders flocked to this area, they discovered ancient manuscripts left by the ancient Greeks and Romans. Classical knowledge is knowledge of philosophy, science, and astronomy in the ancient cultures around the Mediterranean Sea. Until the Middle Ages, classical knowledge was reserved for those who could read and write. This means that knowledge was heavily limited to clergy and monks, who copied these texts to preserve them as treasures, but not to spread knowledge. As population increased in Western Europe due to advances in technology and agriculture, there was a higher need for literate people to keep records. Churches could no longer handle the growing need for education, and schools began to develop. Schoolmasters taught science and philosophy based on the classical manuscripts to many people. Students were encouraged to discuss this knowledge and exchange ideas, although some scholars like Thomas Aquinas attempted to link classical philosophy with church doctrine.
Brothers, let us consider how classical knowledge and the Holy Scriptures are harmonious. The ancient philosophers like Aristotle pursued truth through reason, and this reason is not opposed to faith, but its foundation. As Proverbs teaches, the Lord gives wisdom. So, philosophy illuminates the path to sacred truth.
The spread of classical knowledge led to a deeper understanding of the Church's place in society. There was a growing dislike of the Church's power in secular matters, as well as the immense wealth and the corruption it created. Sometimes heretical beliefs became popular enough to see the formation of sects. One of these sects was known as the Cathars or Albigensians. This group was popular in the 12th and 13th centuries in Italy and parts of southern France. Cathars were dualistic, meaning they believed in good and evil. They associated good with things that were spiritual and intangible, while they associated evil with things that were tangible.
Dwells the good God, he who shaped the spirit and gave it light. But this flesh, this earth, was forged by a darker hand. The evil power chained our souls in
Cathars didn't acknowledge the sacraments performed by the Catholics and didn't accept the physical birth and death of Jesus.
Bread and wine cannot hold the eternal. Water cannot wash the soul. And no man can claim power over your spirit. Instead, we give this, the consolamentum, a baptism of the heart, of breath, of life.
They were very dissatisfied with the wealth of the Catholic Church and the large cathedrals they built. As we learned previously, heresy before the Middle Ages wasn't a huge problem, so the Church didn't have a formal procedure for dealing with heretics. Because the popularity of the Cathars had grown so huge in the 12th century, the Church had to form a formal position against heretics. They even began military assault against Cathars. Pope Innocent III declared a crusade, or a holy war, against the Cathars in 1209 and succeeded in dissolving much of the group in France.
I declare a crusade against the Cathars or Albigenses!
Afterwards, the Inquisition occurred to root out any other Cathars and eliminate their practices. The Inquisition was the Catholic Church's weapon against heresy. During the Inquisition, Catholics prosecuted people who they believed were guilty of heresy. Those found guilty could be sentenced to execution, which usually meant to be burned alive.
Henry III was King of England from 1216 to 1272, 56 years in total, reigning from when he was just 9 years old to when he was 65. He's the longest-serving king of the medieval era. His tenure was only beaten by George III, whose reign started 544 years after Henry's coronation. Henry was the fourth of 14 Plantagenet kings who ruled England. For the first part of his reign, Henry III was effectively controlled by English noblemen. When he came of age, though, he was keen to prove his worth as a strong king, so invaded France in 1230.
He was succeeded by his son, Henry III, who allowed the Magna Carta to be reissued with several significant omissions related to safeguards of national liberties and restrictions on taxation. The document was written in Latin. The Latin words Magna Carta mean Great Charter. It was basically the first constitution in Europe.
Henry III is the fourth Plantagenet king. His grandfather, Henry II, ruled over more of France than the French king. But thanks to the incompetence of Henry III's dad, King John, most of those lands are gone. Henry dreams of getting them back. He's going to be a great Plantagenet king. To be a king in the Middle Ages, you've got to be tough and politically savvy. You need to fight wars and win, and the winning part's important. You need to dispense justice fairly and evenly, and above everything else, you need a boundless energy, the appetite to get up in the morning and rule. Unfortunately for England, Henry III lacks pretty much every one of those qualities. Henry's already had 2 goes at retaking his lost French lands. But Henry messed it up big time. Both times it ended in expensive defeat. The barons lost all confidence in the king. Now they've turned off the money supply. Which, of course, they can. Henry's completely hamstrung by Magna Carta. Today we think of it as a charter of human rights and the foundation of liberty. But to Henry, it's just a list of things he can't do. And top of that list is that he can't raise any new taxes without the barons' say-so. Winning back his Plantagenet empire is going to cost Henry a bomb. But Magna Carta means the barons don't have to cough up. They think Henry can talk the talk, but he can't walk the walk. And that's the truth about Henry. He's a total dreamer. But give him his due. He dreams big. This is Westminster Abbey. Henry builds it to restore some lost Plantagenet pride. You can imagine Henry wandering through this incredible building thinking, sends off all the right signals for a great king. But as far as the barons are concerned, that's exactly what he's not. And Henry just isn't strong enough to take them on alone. But in autumn 1230, a man turns up at court who changes the course of Henry's reign. a minor French knight with big ambitions. Simon de Montfort. De Montfort doesn't do anything by halves. He wears a hair shirt under his clothes 24/7. It rakes his skin, a perpetual reminder to stay focused on God. Basically, he's a fanatic. And he backs his belief with action. He spent his youth chasing heretics around the south of France with a sword. Henry sees a man with the muscular, no-nonsense single-mindedness that he needs to achieve his big dreams. Henry was so young when he came to the throne that he's grown up with other people making all the important decisions for him. So when he meets Simon, charismatic, decisive, he's looking at him and thinking, I could use a man like that.
Sire, je suis honoré de pouvoir offrir mon obédience.
Henry's drawn to de Montfort like a moth to a flame.
Et pitié de nous tous.
But it's not just one-sided, because Simon may be pious, but he's also very ambitious. And he's come to England looking for the lucrative title of Earl of Leicester, which he thinks belongs to his family. So he's looking at Henry and thinking exactly the same thing. I could use a man like that. Unsurprisingly, Henry and Simon quickly become best mates. Simon's soon on the King's Council, basically his right-hand man. He's even steward at the King's wedding. Simon de Montfort is on the way up. Stored at the National Archives is an amazing document that has survived for 8 centuries. It reveals just how ambitious Simon is. This is the King's official copy of a charter made by Simon de Montfort in 1236. Its contents aren't really that important. What is important is the way Simon's referred to himself. It says here, Simon de Montfort, Commes, that's Earl of Leicester. And that's interesting because Simon had lots of the lands that went with the title of Earl, but he didn't have the title itself. And that tells us quite a lot about Simon. Firstly, it tells us he's ambitious. Secondly, it tells us he rates his relationship with the king high enough to go about using a title he doesn't really have the right to. But thirdly, it tells us he's right, because this is the king's official copy. Henry's given it his sign-off. So Simon might be cocky, but it's with very good reason. Henry can't get enough of Simon. He propels his new best friend into the medieval stratosphere. Simon marries Henry's sister, Eleanor, the greatest catch in the kingdom. Henry should have married her off to one of the great European rulers to secure a political alliance. But he's convinced Simon can help him become the great king of his dreams. So he gives Eleanor to his best mate instead. You'd imagine Simon's feeling pretty pleased with himself. He's married to the king's sister. He's an insider at court. He's the king's favourite. Considering where he came from, he hasn't done too badly. But Simon's deal is not all it seems. Eleanor should have come with a massive dowry. Instead of giving it to his friend, Henry hangs on to the money and land for himself. This decision sows the seeds of catastrophe. In 1239, Henry makes de Montfort Earl of Leicester. Simon's now the king's brother-in-law, his chief advisor, and an English baron. But at precisely this moment of triumph, Simon goes too far. He takes out a big fat loan using Henry as guarantor. As far as he's concerned, Henry owes him for his wife's dowry. So he doesn't ask Henry first. Big mistake.
Qu'est-ce que c'est ça? Bordel sous mon nom?
Mais sire.
When Simon tries to play it down,
Formalité. Vous ne devez pas vous inquiéter.
Henry threatens to throw Simon and his own sister into the Tower of London. And he's not kidding. For Henry, this is an outrageous liberty. Giving things to Simon, well, that's one thing, but he can't just stand around while Simon takes what he wants. Henry doesn't like it, but Simon has to go. Simon and Eleanor are forced to flee to France. It seems like the end of a beautiful friendship. But Henry's going to need Simon again sooner than he thinks. Just 3 years later, the king gets himself into big trouble. Henry's launched an attack here at Poitou in western France. It was once his ancestors' territory. Henry thought he could take it back, but he couldn't. Just like last time, the barons used Magna Carta to deny him the taxes he needed. But just like last time, Henry went ahead anyway. Attacking Poitou was spectacularly stupid, because the Count of Poitou's brother is the French king. Henry's forces quickly find themselves chased down by the whole French army. In desperation, Henry has called on the one man he believes can help him, his estranged and banished best friend, Simon de Montfort. Simon was just back from a year on crusade in the Holy Land, so his military expertise was greater than ever, and Henry had eaten humble pie to get him back. Now this is quite a climb down. Henry was the one who banished Simon in the first place, and now he's stuffed without him. But even Simon can't salvage this disaster. Henry flees the field. He leaves Simon fighting a desperate rearguard action with the king's men. They retreat towards the town of Saintes. Henry is cowering inside the town, and it's not just the French army that comes storming after him.
Monseigneur, où vous vous cachez?
Simon is not used to losing. Now it's his turn to explode at the king. The king himself reported what Simon says.
Je suis le roi. Oui, oui. Mais oui, vous êtes le roi. On devait vous enfermer, comme Charles Sanglé.
Now, Charles the Simple was a notoriously useless French king whose subjects put him in jail because he was such a bad general. Thinking about locking up your king is one thing, but actually saying it to his face is flirting with treason.
But Henry can't call Simon on it. This is the king's third failure in France. There's now zero chance the English barons will support his ambitions. He desperately needs an ally in the aristocracy. And Simon is still the Earl of Leicester.